Good evening. This week, all eyes are on Vice President Kamala Harris. This week, all eyes are on Vice President Kamala Harris as she steps onto the national stage, not just as Biden's loyal deputy, but as the Democratic Party's torchbearer against a resurgent Trump machine. But this isn't just a coronation. It's a defining moment for the party, a litmus test for the soul of the nation, and a line in the sand for what we stand for moving forward. We've seen the attacks ramp up, the polls tighten, and the fundraising arms race hit a fever pitch. And yet, amidst the noise, the question remains, can Kamala Harris galvanize a coalition that's not just an anti-Trump movement, but pro-hope, pro-progress, and pro-America's future? From the fervor in the convention hall to the whispers in the back rooms, we're going to break down tonight what's at stake, who's positioning themselves as key power players, and how the Republicans are bracing themselves for the storm that's about to hit. Strap in, because tonight, night one of the Democratic National Convention, is one for the history books. And I'm so glad to be joined by each of you. We've got Nate Honore, of course, a graduate of the Quinnipiac University School of Law, and the current employee for the Workers' Family Party, Reginald Richardson, who is a current DNC delegate right now, who's on the bus as we speak, on his way to the convention hall. And then we've got Kristen Copeland, who is a PR guru, someone who is well-versed in public communications in the realm of politics on Capitol Hill. What a team to have for a night like this. I want to just start off the conversation by asking you, your thoughts as we enter into this historic event. Now, this is really an election the likes of which the country hasn't seen, I would say, since 1968, not just because of the obvious parallels with Chicago being the center of all of the attention, with being the location of the Democratic National Convention. But think about it. This summer, we've seen an assassination attempt. We've seen the current incumbent president resign. This is something that never happens, really. The current incumbent is almost expected to election. Symbolizes the culmination of the political career of the person holding the Oval Office. And Biden decided, after getting much pressure from his party this summer, to step down and immediately endorse his vice president, squashing, a potential internal party conflict, which I thought was to the benefit of the Democratic Party. And now here we are in a week that is really going to be emphasizing unity. Tonight is going to be all about President Biden's accomplishments and his legacy. Your thoughts? Anyone can jump in. Oh, hold on. Go ahead, Kristen.
I'm unmuted now. I was just saying, Mike, time is keeps slipping into the future. It seems like such a long but short while ago that we received the historic news that after many years of incredible public service, President Joe Biden was going to be stepping down, and we were going to begin to make history with our first vice president, woman vice president, also potentially becoming our first female Black and Asian woman to become president. And I think it's just such a feat. So I'm really excited to see what's going to take place this week and the conversations that are going to be happening. We are not going back. It continues to be the theme. I know there were some Democratic consultants that weren't really in love with that messaging. And according to a recent report, I believe it was with the New York Times, Kamala and her team said, we're going to keep it anyway. And so I really am looking forward to seeing President Barack Obama, of course, former First Lady Michelle Obama, as they were the last to make history in this way. And I think it's just an amazing moment for our country.
Yeah, I 100% agree. When the fever over whether President Biden should stay in the race or step down was igniting, my personal thought was, Joe Biden can win. He's beaten Trump before, but is he the best person, and can he prove that? And what he ultimately decided to do was re-energize, was throw his support behind the vice president, who immediately has re-energized the race, who in the first 24 hours shattered the fundraising record for most donations within a day, who almost immediately reunified the party, winning, I think by the current count, about 99% of the pledged delegates. And so we've seen this race flip around on its head, where previously where we were looking at a race where it was two somewhat unpopular candidates that no one really liked, to the point where now we have someone who, despite being the incumbent vice president, is also a change candidate, which is something that it turns out a lot of voters have really wanted all along. And so I think that that the vice president has put herself into a very good position, and I think with a successful convention and early voting only being a few weeks away, she can really start to pull away.
And I can't help but just acknowledge the elephant in the room, as we're talking about all the energy and excitement that's going behind the vice president. I mean, this is a historic candidacy. We know that. But nobody, and I will say this is my personal take. You're free to disagree. And I've made my expressions known on my platforms. Nobody would want to be treated the way Biden was treated. I don't care how old you are or young you are. No one would want to have a stellar record, work against the odds. Think about it. When Biden came into office, people were hiding in their homes. We had a pandemic raging. The economy was in free fall because of the mismanagement of the pandemic. Trump took us out of the World Health Organization. There was literally a war going on consistently between the CDC and the executive branch of the federal government, and conflicting messages between wearing masks and social distancing. And Biden took office and within a few weeks injected $1.9 trillion into the U.S. economy through the American Rescue Plan. There was a coordinated federal effort to get vaccinations into the arms of Americans, which was successful. So successful that it surpassed its expectation goal within a certain amount of months. And then they had to set another goal only to shatter that goal. Then the bipartisan infrastructure bill, a huge infrastructure overhaul. The first since, the largest since the Eisenhower interstate highway program. Biden signed the CHIPS Act, which allows us to be competitive with China. Biden was able to, despite the odds, get a huge or significant amount of the Build Back Better agenda enacted through the Inflation Reduction Act, the largest climate investment in U.S. history. All of these things, the only president to prioritize student loan forgiveness. And the list goes on and on. And despite that, the polls, the same polls that told us in 1988 Dukakis was on his way to win by a 15-point margin in the summer, the same polls that told us that Hillary Clinton better start measuring the drapes of the Oval Office, the same polls told us that the race was, within the margin of error with Trump leading in most battleground states. And then after the debate performance of June 27th, Democrats started to decide they're done with Biden. And I thought that it was such a drastic and huge decision in light of the fact that party unity is usually seen in these days on the Democratic Party side. And the way in which it was conducted in such a public manner, Nancy Pelosi and going on Morning Joe and expressing doubt in Biden's chances, I thought was a huge, probably one of the biggest or the most impactful things to happen during the course of this campaign. I think historians will probably point to that as probably a huge deciding factor in what happened. But I lay out Biden's accomplishments to say this has been a president that's old, yes, but also is probably one of the wisest presidents we've had, and knew exactly how much leeway and rope to give the other side and how much to concede before closing in a deal. And I think he gave Chuck Schumer the leeway he needed to go behind closed doors with Joe Manchin in the summer of 2022 to get the Inflation Reduction Act passed. After it was declared dead, Mitch McConnell was already celebrating the fact that this was not going to pass. And he was very upset when Joe Manchin changed his tune. Any other thoughts?
No, Mike, I think you're right. I think what it comes down to is Joe Biden really deserved better, right? Look, we all saw the debate. It wasn't his best performance, but did he deserve some of his closest allies, some of the individuals like President Obama, who he supported throughout his presidency? Did he deserve to have his allies publicly kind of push him out the way? Today, Joe Biden is going to be given, the speech and at the DNC, and this is being phrased as his capstone to his career, a big thank you, but there has to be like hard feelings here that, the reason why he isn't a nominee, a lot of that has to do with some of his closest friends really pushing him out. But if you take a step back, Mike, you kind of outlined a lot of his accomplishments during his presidency, but just look at, how will history kind of look at Joe Biden, and you look at it through the lens of the role that he's played in progressing, one, being able to support the first Black president. He was the vice president to Barack Obama. And then also, we have Kamala Harris here as the first, Black vice president because of Joe Biden. And then also he put a Black woman on the Supreme Court. So, Joe Biden has a pretty good record, a pretty good career. When you are even isolated, when you look at his role he played in really breaking, quote unquote, a glass ceiling for a lot of individuals in the political arena. This speech that he will give, the DNC, I think it's going to be well deserved. I think everyone, should applaud his full career. But, at the same time, it's going to be kind of awkward because we haven't seen this before where a president, incumbent president has stepped down, before the election to allow the vice president to run. But it'd be interesting to see, his speech.
Excellent points. And I want to, Reggie's having a little trouble with his connection because he's literally on the bus headed to the convention hall right now as we speak. But, just to go in alignment with what you had mentioned, Jerry, I mean, even on, I don't think we've had as successful as a president on foreign policy. I mean, I remember, Bush, right? Bush said, I looked into Putin's soul and I saw, he looked into his eyes and he saw his soul. And you could see Putin smirk like this joker thinks I have a soul. And then you fast forward to 2008 and what happens during the Olympics, the invasion of Georgia. Fast forward to 2014 with Obama. Putin never saw Obama as someone who was his equal for personal prejudice reasons and just someone who was politically inexperienced. He felt as if he could run rings around Obama, and Obama gave him a little bit too much leeway, in my view. You fast forward to Trump. Trump was literally in Helsinki side by side with Putin and said, I would believe the Putin over my own intelligence agencies when asked by Jonathan Lemire about potential Russian hacking into the 2016 election. And Biden takes over, and what does Biden do? Biden lets Putin know from the beginning, from that summer in 2021, the summit that took place between the two men, that he's not going to allow him to cross the line. And the minute that Putin invaded Ukraine, Biden was able to rally a strong coalition of members of the United Nations. The NATO has been its strongest under this president. We've got 2 new members with the potential of more coming soon. This president has been probably on par with George H.W. Bush in terms of foreign policy successes. I know that people would say, well, look at the Afghanistan withdrawal. Even in the Afghanistan withdrawal, the fact that it took place early on in the administration as opposed to 2022 or 23 speaks volumes, because look at what we're talking about now in 2024. Very little attention, really, even on the right, is going towards the Afghan withdrawal. They keep bringing it up like a talking point, but that's not even a deciding issue. Poll after poll shows. Reggie, are you around? Can you hear? Okay, I think he's having a little problem. In the meantime, go ahead.
I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
I wasn't interrupting, but since I did step in here, I'm just going through the security line. There was a breach of security earlier at the convention, which delayed, I would say, maybe just even looking at it, maybe And so that so I appreciate being here. Wanted to at least that context. As I've been get my screen less blurry, but better, Mike.
Awesome, and you're a little glitchy, but we understand it's because you're in motion right now and moving around and trying to get through security right now. But another aspect of this is the passing of the torch. A lot of these pundits have been using that phrase. I heard Adam Schiff use it over and over in the summer when he came out with his op-ed in the New York Times to say Biden needs to step down. I always thought that Biden would be more of a progressive president in his second term than the first, but now that that's not happening, there's certain things that could define the Harris presidency, and abortion is, probably in the first three categories of prominent issues that she's going to have to address, depending on how big of a majority she gets in Congress. You also have the John Lewis voting rights bill. That was one of the pieces of legislation that Biden was unsuccessful in getting passed because of Republican obstruction against the bill. And then there's the fact that you still have the ongoing wars between Israel and Hamas. There are protesters outside the convention hall as we speak. There have been demonstrations. There have been people expecting 50 to 60,000 protesters. But guess what? There's only about 6,000 protesters in Chicago right now. So significantly less than expected. And then you also have the situation that we've been discussing earlier, the situation with Ukraine and Russia. So Harris, if she prevails against Trump in November, is inheriting a lot on her plate, and she's going to have to hit the ground running. So this is not just a historic presidency for the sake of the demographics that the candidate fulfills, but also because of what she's going to be stepping into. Your thoughts about how Harris could potentially distinguish herself from her potential predecessor, Biden, as it pertains to these issues?
Well, I think first and foremost, when you talk about the situation, the genocide, quite frankly, that's taking place in Gaza, I think that's going to be a key defining moment for her. We saw from a messaging perspective at a rally a couple of weeks ago, there was the now infamous "I'm speaking" line that a lot of people looked at and wondered, hey, is she actually going to be listening to our concerns? But the vice president has made it very clear she supports a ceasefire. She is very, very much looking to get the hostages back home and work out a ceasefire agreement between Hamas and Israel. And so I think, a little refinement on that messaging and then coming out with stronger policy around it. And I believe we've even seen some documents earlier today circulating around the official position and how it's kind of shifted from a messaging perspective. But I think that's going to be one of the things that really defines the vice president when she ascends to the highest role in the land. I also think I was really happy to see, and I think a really key defining moment of her vice presidency was when she, came out against Roe v. Wade. And the Supreme Court's ruling. And I believe, before then she had some missteps in terms of some of the things she was saying and the assignments that, she was focusing on. And I really think she found her stride in that moment. And it's really encouraging to have such a strong voice in the White House for women, as Joe Biden has already, championed throughout his career. So I think she'll definitely continue to build on that and make sure that Roe v. Wade becomes the law of the land should she get into office. I also would love to see, how she plans to continue to build out her policy around the economy. We heard about the tax credits that she was proposing for infants, for newborns, that would really have an impact on people who are looking to start families. We've seen the various conversations she's had around people having money for down payment assistance for home ownership to be a possibility for them. We've seen that she's just remained a champion on those issues that really support a strong middle class. And so I think that she'll definitely continue on the work that was done by President Biden to build up a really strong economy, to make sure that we have a system and processes that work for the American people as a whole.
Excellent point. Oh, go ahead, Dan. I'm sorry.
And when we also talk about passing the generational change, you also see the very big stylistic difference in the rhetoric that Kamala Harris has used versus President Biden. Joe Biden has had a very long political career. He spent much of that time supporting women's issues. He wrote the Violence Against Women Act. He supported an assault weapons ban. He was very strong on women's issues, but for all of his benefits, he had a very hard time around abortion messaging. And the phrasing he found in the 90s that he's used ever since was, as a Catholic, I'm personally opposed to abortion, but I support a woman's right to choose, which 30 years in the future has not sounded as strong and has not really been the strong messaging on abortion that people needed, which is where the vice president turned out to be such a benefit, because she had no issue making those kind of statements. But we also saw in the very first remarks that she made as a presidential candidate in this cycle, when she spoke to her new staff at the campaign headquarters in Delaware. Joe Biden very much came from a very different time where there was a lot of bipartisan consensus around foreign policy issues. There was bipartisan consensus around building a strong economy and those kind of things, and a strong sense of collegiality within the Senate. And when he first started out in his political career, Delaware was a swing state. And so there was a lot of collegiality, both intra-party and inter-party, that had to be had in order to strengthen candidates both through primary and general elections. Kamala Harris, on the other hand, came up in the bluest city in one of the bluest states in the country, effectively a single-party city in a single-party state where someone has to do a lot of bare-knuckle boxing to get ahead. Her first campaign win was beating the Pelosi machine when she became district attorney of San Francisco. And when she entered the Senate, it was Mitch McConnell, the Senate Majority Leader, Mitch McConnell, who famously said that he was going to obstruct every single thing Barack Obama did. So she doesn't have any nostalgic memories about a collegial Senate. To quote herself, she exists in the context of where she is. And so she's much more willing to take the kind of swings that Joe Biden couldn't take. That's why in her very first address, she said, I prosecuted abusers, predators, scammers, and fraudsters, so I know Donald Trump's type. And that, to me, was the kind of messaging that the party and that the base and that this campaign was sorely missing from the person at the top of the ticket.
Good points. And Kamala Harris, the vice president, is also the first vice president, to visit a clinic, right, an abortion clinic. And so she has made, as it pertains to how she distinguishes herself from her predecessor, she has been more to the left of Biden, definitely, on this particular issue, but on a lot of different issues. I want to play this clip of Kamala Harris, the vice president, in her own words on where she stands on reproductive rights.
We believe in freedom. Freedom from the government telling us what to do about matters of heart and home. We believe in the right of people to make basic decisions like when and if they will start a family and how.
So obviously she's signaling to the progressive left in her base. She's picking up the baton exactly where Biden left off in promising to codify Roe versus Wade if elected and if given a significant majority in both chambers of Congress. Now, she's also made a distinguishment between herself and her predecessor on the economy. She's rolled out her new economic plan, as Kristen pointed out, which has gotten a lot of criticism from those on the right as being too communist. I want to go ahead and play the clip of her in her own words as she explains her economic agenda for her candidacy.
We will provide $6,000 in tax relief to families during the first year of a child's life. Now think what that means. Think what that means. That is a vital, vital year of critical development of a child. And the cost can really add up, especially for young parents who need to buy diapers and clothes and a car seat and so much else. And we will do this while reducing the deficit. Compare my plan with what Donald Trump intends to do. He plans to give billionaires massive tax cuts year after year. And he plans to cut corporate taxes by over $1 trillion, even as they pull in record profits. And that's on top of the $2 trillion tax cut he already signed into law when he was president, which, by the way, overwhelmingly went to the wealthiest Americans and corporations and exploded the national deficit. You know, I think that if you want to know who someone cares about, look who they fight for.
Now, of course, she pointed out, very good points. President Trump has increased the federal deficit by nearly $2 trillion. Most of the economic growth that they allude to, and I wrote it, I gave an op-ed that was featured in Newsweek, and I talked about this. The economic growth that they like to allude to as a result of Trump's tax plans, the tax cut, the 2017 Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, his signature achievement legislatively, added to the deficit. At 82 or to 83% of those tax cuts went to the top 1% of Americans and corporations. So she's making the distinguishment between herself and her opponent by saying, my plan is for families. I want to continue where Biden left off on the child tax credit. I want to, invest in the middle class. Bidenomics, of course, as Biden dubbed it, was basically defining the economic policy of his presidency, and Kamala Harris seems to be just digging in deeper into that. And what is that policy? Growing the economy, as Biden would say, from the bottom up and the middle out, as opposed to Reaganomics, which is traditionally providing tax cuts and loose regulations at the top, and hoping that some of that benefit trickles down to everyone else at the bottom. Now, despite Harris rolling out her economic agenda, Trump is still leading in most polls on the issue of the economy. Not just leading, but leading significantly. While Harris may lead in other respects, Trump still is dominant in this particular area. Is this just a messaging issue, or do people just, and I heard Morning Joe, talk about it today. It's like we have this kind of romanticized view of what life was like before COVID. We have this kind of idea that, things were just cotton candy and rainbows everywhere. The first 3 years of the Trump presidency saw a reduction of job creation, 182,000 jobs per month, as opposed to the last 3 months of Obama's term in office, which was over 240,000 jobs per month. Yet Trump is seen as Mr. Economy consistently in poll after poll. Can anyone explain this?
I think, of course, I think there is some pre-COVID nostalgia that is there. But I think another thing is the fact that a lot of Americans really just do not know Kamala Harris, right? We know that she's a vice president, and we are familiar with her career and some of her viral moments when she was the United States Senator during the Kavanaugh hearing. But on the question of the economy, these last few weeks or last couple of days, she's rolled out some of her plans for the economy. But I think it could still, spell out a little more detail there. And I think it's really, when you look at the polls right now, I think it's really more of a function of a lot of people just still not knowing her or being as familiar with her policy stances. So I think, we are less than 100 days away from the election. I think what is probably on the forefront of the Harris campaign is, one, introducing herself, right, to the country in that way, and introducing her economic policies, and then to be able to distinguish her policies from Joe Biden, all right, because that is something that she's going to have to do. There's going to have to walk a fine line there, but that is something that I don't think the campaign has made an effort of doing so far. So I think when people are looking at Trump versus Harris on the economy, I think at this point, because Harris's policies are still fairly new and or unknown, people are actually comparing Trump versus Biden still, right? So I'm expecting those opinions of public opinions to change going forward. But I think that it is important for her to kind of, sit down and kind of detail, her viewpoints on some of these issues. I think like the child credit, tax credit. I think it's a great idea, but I think there's still some room to go. I think kind of going back to the first part of our conversation about Biden stepping down, and letting Kamala Harris step in as the nominee. I think the thing that pushed Biden to make that decision on that Sunday was the idea that it wasn't just that he was unlikely to win the presidency at that time. It was the effect that he was having on the Senate races and congressional races. And so a lot of these conversations, these big policy issues that Kamala is discussing, during her rallies and her campaign is pushing out, is really, is going to be dependent on whether or not, we can have a Senate and have a Congress, a Democratic Congress. So I think right now, I think that is probably the biggest push is one, let's get, a majority in the House. Let's expand a majority in the Senate. And then we can have these discussions about, what do we do with Roe v. Wade being overturned a few years ago? How can we bring that back? And some of these big ticket economic items.
Jerry, you're spot on with everything you said, and I wanted to talk specifically about what you started off your statement with, which is this is a chance for Vice President Harris to really introduce herself to the American people. During her vice presidency, and even on the campaign trail when she was campaigning with President Biden in 2020, we weren't able to see her in the same capacity that we would typically see a vice presidential candidate. There were several op-eds by a number of women that I really admired that talked about how Kamala really didn't get a fair shot to introduce herself to the American people. And I think one of the things her campaign is doing really well, as we're waiting for the policy to get wrote out, is they're showing her more personable side. They capitalized on the various memes that were taking place on social media to show, hey, she actually cares about the American people. She's like us in the sense that she has worries about her family. She picked the vice presidential candidate that isn't someone who spent a career getting rich from his legal degree or on Wall Street. So I think when it comes to Vice President Kamala Harris versus President Trump on the economy, it's just a matter of time before the American people finally are able to see what a coherent president looks like when they have policy plans that will actually impact the American people in a great way, as opposed to what we've seen with former President Trump, which is a lot of nonsense. Let's just put it that way. Keep it brief.
I think as well intrinsically, voters just have tended to trust Republicans on the economy more over the past 40 years after Reagan slashed taxes on the wealthy and oversaw a relatively strong economy through much of his presidency. That being said, fundamentally, Joe Biden has built an incredibly strong economy. The US had the lowest inflation wave out of the developed world and got out of it the fastest. You look at most of the rest of the world, they're still dealing with sky-high inflation rates and sky-high unemployment. President Biden managed to balance out the slowing of inflation with still a very strong employment report, to the point where the Fed is expected to start cutting interest rates next month. That said, as far as it goes in the economy, the benefit Democrats have is that for the past 40 years, Republicans have called everything communism. And with the child tax credit, which Kamala Harris proposed, she was the deciding vote for a smaller version during the first year of the Biden-Harris administration, which saw child poverty cut in half over that year. And it would have continued to fall had 2 Democratic senators not joined with 50 Republicans and blocked Democrats from expanding it. And had, of course, those 2 Democratic governors been willing to stand up to the voters and run for re-election this cycle, I'm sure they would not have liked the results they'd have gotten for that stunt that they pulled. But as time goes on and we have a new generation of voters who don't remember the Reagan years and start to look at the numbers and think, hey, maybe the economy is better, well, we might start to see some change. And it's also very important to remember that most of the people who talk about the economy are journalists for places like the Wall Street Journal and the New York Times, which are owned by billionaires. And so when Trump cuts their taxes, it's very good for Rupert Murdoch. It's very good for the Sulzbergers. It's not so good for, which means it's somewhat good for their employees. It's not so good for the rest of us who have to sit here and listen to journalists paid by billionaires tell us how great the economy is.
That's a good point. And, Harris has made it, intentionally a priority to ensure that she, signals to the Democratic Party that she's not just resting on Biden's laurels. She wants to take things to the next level. And you have people like Lindsey Graham, someone who was Trump's golf caddy, basically say, oh, when it comes down to policies, we'll win. If we just focus on policies, we'll win. And my question is, what policies? Like to your point, Nate, the United States just 2 days ago was announced to fall to the lowest level of inflation since 2021, under 3%, right? Out of all of the developed economies in the world, out of all of the leading economies in the world, the United States is on top. Name me one country that wouldn't want to switch places with the United States economy right now. And yet you have Trump going on about how things are terrible, how America is on decline. It's the same song he was singing in 2016. It's the same song he was singing at the inauguration about American carnage. And this notion that if the person who's the most negative is going to win the election makes no sense, because Reagan won on the message of It's Morning in America in 1984. Clinton, 1992, comes to power with this, I feel your pain, yes, but this is a new generation. It's a new beginning. We're a bridge to the 21st century was his slogan in 96. George W. Bush, comes to power with this notion of being a compassionate conservative, being a uniter, not a divider. Obama, 20 years ago at the DNC in Boston, which launched his national political career, said that we're not a collection of red states and blue states. We are and forever will be the United States of America. These are the messages that usually propel winning messages. Even Hillary Clinton's campaign. I know people said, well, there wasn't really a defining phrase for Hillary Clinton to encapsulate what she was running on. But Hillary Clinton's campaign was relatively positive in compared to her opponent. When you look at the fact that, she was campaigning with Taylor Swift, she was, she looked happy campaigning in Michigan with Jennifer Granholm. She looked happy with Huma Abedin on the campaign bus. She looked much happier and looked to present a better message, positive message, than Trump, who was running on how things are just terrible. And it seems as if the Republicans have this idea that don't make it personal because you win on policy. And I'm like, what policy? The overturning of Roe versus Wade? Do you think that's where the majority of people are? Or is it the fact that you want to give Israel a blank check to bomb the Palestinians into smithereens? What policy does Trump support that is in alignment with the majority of the American people? I've heard this argument over and over from folks on the right, and they have this notion that if Trump can just be disciplined enough to make this a campaign about policy, then he'll win. And my question is, on what policy are the Republicans on the winning side of?
It's really funny you say that, because in 2020, Republicans didn't have a platform. The 2020 Republican Party platform was 2016 plus whatever Trump says. And so now when they go after Kamala for being light on policy, it's like, you guys didn't have a platform 4 years ago. Your platform now, Trump is already not even running on. Trump is running away from Project 2025, which was written by his own people. But also, when you look at this race, Trump was making it, what the crux of Trump's argument was, Joe Biden is old. And after the debate, where Joe Biden did in fact look old and come off as old, Trump probably thought that he could go on cruise control until November 5th and wake up on November 6th having become president-elect. But something changed instead, and now Kamala Harris is the nominee. He can't run on Joe Biden is old anymore because he's not running against Joe Biden. It's why Trump is writing fan fiction about Joe Biden trying to seize back the nomination at the convention because he wants Biden back. He doesn't know how he can beat someone on age when he's the oldest person to ever seek the presidency. So policy now has to be his thing, but the problem is that Republican policy is broadly unpopular. You look at one of the leading issues of this campaign, which is abortion rights. The anti-abortion candidate has won the popular vote once in the 21st century, and that was George Bush in 2004. That's it. And the only anti-abortion candidate to win the popular vote before then was his father in 1988. Every single Republican then has lost the popular vote. You look at taxing the wealthy. That's another winner for Democrats. The child tax credit, another winner for Democrats. Affordable housing, another winner for Democrats. And so that's why we see Trump and the campaign in such a tailspin. That's why you see Trump's allies on the far right saying you've got to fire your campaign staff and bring in more right wingers. And that's why you've got the Heritage Foundation saying, oh, Trump knows what Project 2025 is. He just has to win. There's no cohesion on the Republican side because they planned their whole thing on Joe Biden is 82 years old. Yuck. But now with a 78-year-old nominee on one side versus a 59-year-old nominee on the other, that just doesn't stick the same way.
And it goes back to my argument about why Democrats are always panicking. They're always panicking. You go back to 1984, they were panicking about the Mondale campaign not being disciplined enough. You go back to 2016, they're panicking because, Anthony Weiner, the DNC was hacked. And we get so caught up in the latest distraction that the focus that should have been, right, on forming an articulate message and presenting the case like you just did is lost. If we had spent those 28 days after June 27th, and I know folks may disagree who are listening or maybe on this platform, but if we had spent those 28 days saying, okay, Biden had a bad debate, but guess what? He's still the best candidate on the economy when you look at the numbers, right? If he's still the best candidate for your reproductive freedoms, even on issues that, folks say, oh, well, transgenders, and we don't want transgenders, males playing in female sports. We're at a point where almost, so many Republicans, conservatives in the heartland, they have somebody in their family who's a member of the LGBTQ community. And they don't want them to be mistreated. They don't want them to be the target for abuse. They don't want them to be treated any differently than their other family members. And so even on that issue, right, what are we talking about? We're talking about just basic human rights, just the right to be free from discrimination, right? Even on that issue, if you had just framed it as opposed to this wild radical thing, I believe personally that we would have seen a change in the polls. And not only that, but even though we have the Harris leading Trump and people are getting excited and the celebrity endorsements and all these things, the donors like Abigail Disney pressured Nancy Pelosi and Jason Crow and Adam Schiff and all of these, power broker Democrats to dump Biden off ship because they said, well, I'm withholding my money until I get to see a new candidate, George Clooney, right? And they won. So I'm disheartened by that because, in my view, it doesn't take courage to jump when a large donor says jump. I understand the pragmatism argument. I understand, these are things that make campaigns run money. But what if we had just shifted the national attention from the debate and moved on? Think of the fact that Biden had 12 campaign events after that debate and multiple high-stakes interviews with George Stephanopoulos, with Lester Holt, and others. And the attention was still on the debate. And how many events did Trump do? How many campaign of public appearances did Trump make in comparison? And I'm asking this just objectively. And Trump just had to roll around on his golf course, and Democrats were making the case for him. We were too busy panicking, and we had no business panicking. Trump lost every election since 2016. Even in 2016, he lost the popular vote. He lost 2017, Remember, that was the year Ralph Northam won the governorship. That was the year Doug Jones won in Alabama, the state of Alabama. They lost in 2018. That was the year the Squad made its debut. They lost in 2019, Andy Bashir's year. They lost in 2020. They lost in 21, Raphael Warnock and John Ossoff. They lost in 2022. They lost elections in 2023. Here they are in 2024 with the same song and dance, and the Democrats are still panicking. I don't understand it.
Yeah, Mike, I think you have articulated beautifully like the strength of the positions and the arguments that, you know, the Democratic Party has right now from the Biden administration here in this election 2024. I think what was happening after the debate, it wasn't a critique of the Biden administration or even the positions that we're taking, or if we should highlight an economic position more. Now, I think the question was if Biden was able to deliver that message and to make those arguments against Trump. So you look at the debate, I mean, Trump was just there, just lying the entire debate, right? And, Biden wasn't able to really push back and to really present the Democratic vision of future at that time. So I think, some of that pushback from the party, and, some may disagree, it wasn't, this ideal that, the agenda of the Biden administration or even the campaign or the policy agenda wasn't strong, or it wasn't being highlighted enough. It was just the fact that I think people thought that we needed a stronger messenger, someone who can actually respond to some of the lies and the responses from the Republican side, because it was frustrating to watch, to know how many accomplishments this administration has had, and the strong position and the arguments that we have going forward right now, to see the right basically sit there and to lie about the record of Joe Biden, and to to harp on his age and all these other things that's not even related to the main issues that American people are worried about. And it seemed as if Biden wasn't able to punch back. So I think, this change, you talk about the dates, I guess, after the debate, I think a lot of that was just more so of we need someone who could articulate our vision, who can punch back and push back on Donald Trump. And I think that is what led to tonight, more so than anything. But I do also agree with you that if, there was a way to keep Joe Biden at the top of the ticket and still be able to turn things around, right? Because, we were just in the summertime, right? I mean things change so quickly. So there was a route. And I think when you are thinking about the party leaders that push, quote unquote, push Biden out, or was on the side of having Joe Biden to kind of step aside, I don't think everyone was unified. I think, Nancy Pelosi was really on the side of Biden, kind of moving to the side. I think the Obamas was there too. I think, when you look at the Clintons was very supportive of Joe Biden. I think they wanted Joe Biden to stay in the race, right? So I don't think it wasn't a unified push by the party bosses or leaders to get Biden to step aside. I just think at the end of the day, I think Joe Biden made the decision. It was a very difficult decision to make, but I think it's turned on the fact that there were so many, candidates in swing states, in the Senate races, congressional races, that were saying, look, we are struggling. We might lose the House and in the Senate, and it's ideal that Biden was either the messenger of the points, Mike, that you just articulated.
And before I go to Reggie, because I see he's at the convention hall on the floor right now. Somebody said, I keep hearing the Trump people say, well, Harris has not been in any press. She has not had any press conferences. My 2-word response to them is Kelly McEnany. If you don't know who Kelly McEnany is, it's because Trump, the White House press briefing room grew cobwebs all throughout the pandemic because Trump did not have his press secretary go out there and make one press conference. So the hypocrisy of them now demanding the vice president to have a press conference in light of the fact that their own candidate throughout his entire tumultuous last year of president did not have a press conference, and the press conference he eventually gave was on the night of the election, spreading BS about how this election was stolen. You forfeited that right to even talk about press conferences, in my view, right? And let's talk about Biden being in a basement. Trump is in his basement. Just do the math. How many campaign events have the Democrats had, Biden as a candidate and Harris, and then put that side by side by Trump? Just do the math by yourself, right? I'm not trying to take I'm not trying to craft things in a particular skewed way. Just look at the numbers and they speak for themselves. And then ask yourself who's in the basement. Reggie, you're live. Can you hear us?
I certainly can.
What's it like?
Can. It is certainly filled up a lot more. I'm certainly standing between the Illinois and the District of Columbia in New York and Idaho. You can, obviously, we're starting it off. A lot of people have been going through the buses, and it's created a little bit of a mixed feeling, right? They did a ceremonial vote, and a few people weren't able to see that. And so there is still some excitement because you still have the roll call vote coming up. And so there are still people filling in. The United Center is I would say about 70% filled. And we're still on our way to tonight, where Joe Biden will take the stage, which many of us think will be a farewell address, while also pushing us forward, going to the future. And so having all this excitement in the United Center, and right now a standing ovation is being held for the people on the stage. So that's kind of the feeling right now. People are getting excited. People are ready. People are getting comfortable. And now that people have gone through the security perimeters and all the extra stuff, the work of the delegate is showing up early and getting into your spots as quickly as possible so we can then celebrate the amazing accomplishments of Joe Biden while also celebrating the future that is Kamala Harris and our next vice president, Governor Walz. And so it's just exciting. I'm trying to get us a little bit closer to the stage. But yeah, that's where we are right now here in the convention hall at the United Center in Chicago.
That's awesome. And what was the experience outside like? We know a lot of attention has been going towards potential civil unrest that could unfold with the demonstrators and the protesters who are in the First Amendment zone outside of the United Convention Center. What was the experience like? Were there overwhelming amounts of folks protesting? Are you concerned about any kind of disruption going on tonight?
So if anything from today has been an example, is that in reality, the Secret Service and the Illinois State Police and all of the federal partners are doing a phenomenal job to, one, keep delegates safe, but also to make sure that the convention is not disrupted. There's about a half a mile gap between the United Center proper, and I'm a Chicago native, so I'm familiar with coming to the United Center for Bulls games. And you can't just walk up to the United Center. You have to actually go through several rings of security. And so even though there was some overwhelming force that was used to get to the first layer, they caused a decent disruption to the bus route, but they are doing things to keep it from happening again. And I'm confident that we're safe and we're good. Okay, we'll keep walking. Okay, I'm being told I can't stay still. I have to keep walking. So I'm not too concerned about the safety or anything like that. There, Michigan Avenue, all the places where we are as delegates, we are being well protected, well taken care of, and we always have our law enforcement partners looking out for the delegates. Yeah, that's where we are right now, and there's so much more to come, and I'm excited to be able to celebrate what Joe Biden has done tonight.
Awesome. And I'm envious of you being able to be on the floor, witnessing history firsthand. What an amazing experience. Look at that view that he has. I mean, you're right there on the floor. If you could tell us, what delegation are you a part of, Reggie?
I am a part of the Oregon delegation. So your West Coast, your blue wall on the West Coast, we have the privilege of making up the three-part blue wall of Washington, Oregon, and California. Your loyal, faithful blue voters. And so with our chair, Rosa Colquitt, and a lot of our other elected officials, we are sitting actually right there. They have us a little bit higher in the section, but we are right there. So if you're looking for Oregon, we're up here in the beautiful area. We're much like the Northwest, stationed higher than most.
Wow. Well, to be there on the floor of not just any convention, but this particular convention, this is a very historic moment. We're talking about the potential. Well, whoever wins will be the 5th president of the 21st century. And there's going to be a lot on the plate of whoever wins the presidency, Kamala Harris or Donald Trump, in the realm of foreign policy and domestic policy. This nation has experienced so much between 9/11 and now, as it pertains to, foreign threats. And now we're facing domestic threats with potential unrest, as we saw on January the 6th, as a result of Trump spreading misinformation that the election was stolen, which we know was not. And of course, that was preceded by, that came after the fact that the Michigan State House was raided months prior to that, and folks were looking to kill the sitting governor, Gretchen Whitmer, a woman who was potentially seen as someone who could be a running mate to Kamala Harris or be a potential presidential nominee in 2028 before everything just changed. This has been a phenomenal discussion. There are those who are saying, what about the genocide? And I want to be cautious, when you use words like that. I understand they're legitimate goals here that the protesters are trying to address, and that is the indiscriminate bombing of the Palestinian people in the Gaza Strip. That is a legitimate goal. I am cautious about using that term genocide, because when we overuse that word, right, and put it on par with what we witnessed in the 1990s, right, in Bosnia, and what we've seen in the Eastern European states after the dismantling of communism in the late 20th century, we've got to be very careful before we do that. I see some folks in the comments, getting on me for that, but I just want to open up the floor. Dick Durbin has taken the podium. There's going to be so much going on tonight. President Biden, of course, we discussed him. Jill Biden, someone who, interestingly, she did not get over the fact that Kamala Harris attacked President Biden in that primary debate, where she said that little girl on the bus was me. And she tried to attack Biden on an issue that was so archaic, to be honest, 1970s issue, busing. She didn't get over that. And a lot of reports came out about the reservations she had about Kamala Harris joining, the ticket as Biden's vice president. But here we are, right? And President Biden is now going to be, handing over his legacy, in effect, to his current vice president, Kamala Harris. What a night this is. Any other thoughts before we conclude?
Well, I kind of get the sense that the address Joe Biden is going to give tonight is the address he saw himself giving 4 years from now. The big difference, a very big gripe that President Biden has, continues to have with Obama, is that in 2016, when Hillary Clinton was seeking the Democratic nomination, Obama made it very clear that he would prefer Hillary Clinton to succeed him over Joe Biden, and even went so far as to tell Joe Biden, listen, don't let your career end with a loss to Hillary Clinton in the Democratic primary. And Biden continues to hold the opinion that he could have beaten Trump in 2016. He was somewhat vindicated, when he beat Trump in 2020. And so while he had a very successful vice presidency and a strong relationship with his president, the one thing that he can give Kamala Harris that he was never able to receive from President Obama is the unequivocal support of the current occupant of the White House. And there are a load of advantages when you're the incumbent vice president seeking the presidency that you can have. And we've already seen this with President Biden's successful negotiation to release the various political prisoners held in Russia, Evan Gershkovich, Paul Whelan, those individuals. And so as we get closer and closer to Election Day, it's going to be very interesting to see the various ways Biden is able to act behind the scenes in the ordinary course of his job that make Kamala Harris look like an even stronger candidate. That said, I think that he should focus most of his attention on what's going on the violence in Gaza and securing a peace deal. I am personally comfortable using the word genocide. The Rwanda genocide was only 3 months, and it took a year for the rest of the world to actually acknowledge that 800,000 people had been killed solely on the basis of their ethnicity. We are almost a year into the bloodshed in the Gaza Strip. North Gaza has been devastated. South Gaza has been devastated. Historic sites have been devastated. There is no outcry from the international world, and this is a very vulnerable population we're talking about. So I think this is where Joe Biden should use the bulk of his expertise and the bulk of his political capital. And we're already seeing a much freer Biden now that he's not seeking the presidency anymore. And so I hope he continues to keep that streak up and put all of his put his thumb on the scale and get his buddy Netanyahu to agree to a deal that will see lasting peace in the region.
Yeah, Mike, and real quick, I think there's been a lot of conversation today, rightfully so, about Joe Biden getting his flowers and this being kind of his capstone of his career and a focus on his speech. But I also hope, there's going to be a large applause for Biden and praise for Biden. But I also think in this moment that I'm hoping that Hillary Clinton also kind of receive her flowers and receive a moment as well. Because if you look at, we are on the cups of the first woman president, and Kamala Harris stands on the shoulders of Shirley Chisholm and a lot of the strong women in politics over the years. My late Congresswoman Sheila Jackson Lee was a strong supporter of Kamala Harris and Hillary Clinton. And, Hillary didn't break the glass ceiling, but as she most famously said, she put, million cracks in it. I really hope that, as we are here on the cusp of possibly electing the first woman president, that Hillary Clinton is able to kind of get her moment as well. Because you look back at 2016, just think about how different this country would have looked if she would have became president. But just the work, what that election did in the psyche of America and in the way that we view just women candidates. Because Kamala's gender really isn't really at the forefront of discussion here, is because it really has been kind of normalized, over the last decade or so. But I really hope Biden gets his flowers, but also hope that Hillary Clinton, receive her flowers as well tonight.
Reggie.
When it comes to the Joe Biden and all the flowers, I agree wholeheartedly. Everyone should receive their flowers tonight. I think one of the important things tonight is about Joe Biden and his farewell tour. And I think when it comes to the conversation on flowers, he's still not and I've heard Nathan maybe echo this, that his work isn't still, he still is running the country and helping the American people move forward. And in that, Joe Biden's track record of being a coalition builder behind the scenes, there were many years where Joe Biden is just that name of consistency. And I find that probably somewhere in this arena, somewhere in the White House, somewhere Joe Biden is doing the work that we need him to do to be able to make a difference. Not just, it's cool to talk about the policies, but there are things, the bottom line is Americans are hurting. That's what has caused the enthusiasm. So Joe Biden knows what it's like to be an American that suffers, experience hardship and suffering. And the same person that we saw in 2020 that we elected because of his kindness, his care, his humanitarian mindset, he is still that same guy. And so with that, I'm also excited to see how he uses his interpersonal skills with the regular American, with people on the Hill, and people all over Washington and the establishment. Joe Biden will be able to be not only that advocate and that surrogate to get Kamala Harris over the top. And really, we're going to find ourselves in a better America as a result of that. And we'll be better.
This is the most consequential election since 1864. And I've said this time and time again. What was 1864? Of course, that was the Civil War election. That was the year, in which Abraham Lincoln really solidified his legacy. The Emancipation Proclamation was enacted the year before. The 14th, 15th, and 16th Amendments, right, that was the period in which these amendments took place. This election has stakes as high as that, and it's not hyperbole. We're about to elect the 5th president of the 21st century, and the stakes could not be higher. And going back to what someone had alluded to about, Obama, I'm very disappointed personally about Obama. I think that even if in his thinking he felt as if Biden couldn't win, I think he owed it to the party as a party leader to make it clear, as opposed to all this shadowy secret, leaking here, whispering there, op-ed column here, op-ed column there. I think as a party leader, you should quelch any kind of public confusion or public airing of your laundry, so to speak. I think the Clintons, Bill Clinton, of course, I think personally was a better party leader under his watch. Of course, the Democrats were able to win in the 98 midterm election. Obama, of course, even himself said, he wasn't as great as a party leader as he wished he could be. You're talking about the Democratic losses in 2010, the Tea Party wave, 2014, 2012, right? So, and 2016, of course. So I think Bill Clinton and Hillary Clinton recognize that unity is more important right now. And that's why, going back to Jerry's point, they made it known, we're backing the president, Biden. We're backing him. And as soon as Harris was the person, right, who Biden put his support behind, immediately Bill Clinton, Hillary Clinton said, we're behind Harris. And I agree with that. I think that was strong. And another point that we didn't make tonight is that it was not the progressives that pushed Biden out. And Nate, you brought this to my attention all throughout the summer. It wasn't AOC. It wasn't Bernie Sanders. It wasn't the squad who pushed Biden out. It was the moderate progressives who did that. And Bernie Sanders actually wrote an op-ed column saying enough is enough. Enough with the intra-party fighting. Let's just unify, right? If the other side can sell, you that their candidate is a law and order candidate and he's a convicted felon, surely we can sell an 81-year-old person who is successful in passing concrete bipartisan legislation. And so, that's neither here nor there now, but this party is now coalescing. This is going to be a very dynamic fall campaign. I said this before, just like what Obama told his campaign staff, John Favreau, his campaign manager, all the folks from the Podcast Brothers, the Pod Save America group. I don't want to see any of your names in the New York Times or in other major publications fighting with each other, right? This has to be a flawless ship. This has to be a tight run ship. And Kamala Harris has to have that campaign. She can't afford any mishaps. She can't afford any leaks. A lot of people are saying this is the honeymoon phase, and that, Harris, who has been cautious, she's been repeatedly saying she's the underdog in this campaign, and she is. She has to maintain that idea, and she has to make sure that her staff works accordingly. There's no room for error. There's no room to get comfortable because of polling, because of celebrity endorsements, because of donations. Laser focus between now and November 5th, if this campaign is going to succeed. And to the points that many of you made, this was a huge gamble, because what it did is now you have to introduce this candidate to the American people in this small window. And it reminds me of more of a parliamentary system election, where we had a little over 100 days before the big decision was made. Pfeiffer, thank you, Dan Pfeiffer. Those are the Obama folks that Obama, was talking to when he said, I can't afford to have any intra-party fighting, right? So another point, and another friend of mine who's not on the call, who's not on the platform tonight, made, is that in 2016, Obama and the establishment Democrats made a decision to back Hillary Clinton over Joe Biden. Biden went out in the Rose Garden. Obama, told Biden, I don't think you're in the right headspace, right, to run for president, being that Beau Biden had just died. I think that was a mistake in retrospect. I think if Biden had run, and he was the nominee going against Trump, I think we would have a more solid shot. Why do I say that? Because he knew how to speak to Middle America. He knows how to speak to folks from Erie, Pennsylvania. He knows how to speak from folks in Wisconsin, right? So I think that was a mistake. And had Biden been the nominee, I believe we would have been seeing Biden closing out 2 terms right now as opposed to 1. But But of course, alternative history is always a tricky topic. Any other thoughts?
Yeah.
I think you nailed that on the head about the alternative history. I think it's important for us not to diminish Joe Biden's public acknowledgement that at that point he was still grieving the loss of his son, and so that in the loss in the health of his family, and he had served his country for many years. So I don't want to necessarily give too much to the narrative that if we would have had Joe Biden run right after Obama, that we would not be closing out. America was a deeply, white America specifically, was a deeply hurt place by what they perceived was policies that Barack Obama put in place. Right, wrong, or indifferent, their feelings are their feelings, although they may not be around with fact. And so I think there's a nuance when we talk about where we could be. And I think as people supporting and coalescing behind Kamala Harris, celebrate what the Obamas and what the Clintons, the Obamas, and what the Bidens have done for our country. And as we get ready to welcome a new first family come November, and realizing that this is a chance for so many more people to get involved and be enthusiastic. And revisionist history, although sometimes fun to do in theory, can cause a sense of maybe I'm not supposed to be engaged because I didn't get my outcome. And we saw that with other political movements and other individuals who did not get nominations and did not get enough electoral votes. People are like, well, if I would have shown up. And so I would want to caution maybe someone who's feeling, well, yeah, you're right, we should have. And they would feel that this is not the moment for us to coalesce as a party, coalesce as a country, and get behind Kamala Harris and get her over the top in November.
Yeah, 100%, Reggie, right there with you. I think we saw the overwhelming interest, excitement for Vice President Harris with the coalitions, with when Black women win, for example, and the 44,000 that were on that call right after President Joe Biden made the announcement that he was going to be dropping out. And so I definitely agree. Now is the time to coalesce around the vice president to make sure that we are making our voices known, the policies that matter most to us, and watching to see how she responds to that over the next couple of months. And I'm more than excited to see how her campaign will continue to shape up. I think they've been doing a fantastic job thus far.
It has been a really well-run campaign. Going back to 2019, I always said, when she announced on Martin Luther King Day 2019, that was one of the best campaign rollouts of that cycle. It really was. But unfortunately, she faced financial problems by the end of the year, which cost her, her candidacy, and she wasn't able to be competitive going forward in the 2020 Iowa caucuses and beyond. But Kamala Harris was always able to generate a large crowd. She was always able to attract a lot of energy, it seemed, as a politician. And the thing that makes Kamala Harris a little bit different from Hillary Clinton's candidacy is that there was a lot of focus on this fact that Hillary Clinton's candidacy was the female candidacy. The very slogan, "I'm with her," alluded to the historic nature of her candidacy of being the first woman to head a major political party ticket. I think just like in Obama in 2008, you can't make this I'm the black candidate, I'm the woman candidate ticket. I mean, you can't do that. Now people can privately or in their own right celebrate that, but when you embrace that, it's a very risky tactic. And I think the way Harris has run is that she's not running as the female candidate. She's not running as the black candidate. She's running as the prosecutor who's going to take it to Trump. And I think that's effective. I think that's a winning strategy. And I think some people may be upset about that, but look, this is politics, right? It's about winning. It's a zero-sum game. You do what you can to get to the position, and then you enact the policies that benefit the demographics that put you there, right? And not just the demographics that put you there, but all Americans. But the way in which she has framed her message is very disciplined. Nate alluded to it earlier about her taking on fraudsters and corrupt folks. She is ready for this framework, and my only drawback from that would be setting expectations too high. in a similar way to the fact that Trump set expectations low for Biden consistently, just paving the way for him to shatter those low expectations. My only concern is if you make this the prosecutor versus the felon election so much so that people are expecting you to do far greater than you actually end up doing in the debate, and then it backfires. That's my only cautious, I guess, concern about the potential framing. But it's still this is the way to frame the election. Any thoughts about that?
Well, I'm sorry, Nate. I just wanted to chime in as a publicist. I think that, she's going to be coming into the debate fresh off the heels of a high-profile interview. The campaign has said, she has even said, that by the end of the month that they are going to be speaking with the media. And so I definitely do think that there's going to be a number of different ways for her to frame her candidacy before she gets on the debate stage. And then also we have to consider the two candidates that we're going to see on the stage. And so I think, I definitely understand, Mike, we want to make sure that we don't set expectations too high and expect her to address everything perfectly, as that's almost impossible to do during even the most flawless of debates. But what I do think we'll see is the stark contrast between her and a madman that decided to try to do a coup for the United States government on January 6th. And I think that's going to be all the American voters need to see in order to make the decision for who they want to be in charge on November 5th.
And what a choice with the vice president. I mean, the vice presidential debate, to be honest with you, I'm looking forward to that more than the presidential debate, because this is, you've got the guy who rode to Yale on this idea that he was from, poor, predominantly white area in the middle of the country, and you have an actual guy from the middle of the country going at it. This is you have someone who is a capitalist investor from the West going up against someone who's authentic in terms of being from the Midwest, and the gloves are going to be off. The gloves have been already off, right? If you've noticed. J.D. Vance launched an attack on Governor Walz straight out the gate, saying that he's politicizing his military experience. And I think that debate is going to be more, I guess, entertaining or more engaging than the presidential debate set to take place on ABC on September 12th. Reggie, you're going to jump in. Okay.
Well, to your point about Walz, I think that was a very strong pick, and it showed that the Harris campaign is a campaign that is in fact listening to the grassroots, that has noticed the grassroots enthusiasm that has ticked up. Of the $300 million that Kamala Harris raised in her first week as a candidate, 2/3 of that was from first-time donors, and so that's a level of grassroots enthusiasm that we really haven't seen, and I don't like making the Obama comparison, but we really haven't seen it since Obama. With Joe Biden, in 2020, the priority was electability. Who can beat Trump? And he did a very good job of pressing that case. He wasn't as assertive as I would have hoped he had been, as I hoped he would be during the primaries, but he ran a disciplined primary campaign that was focused on not doing harm to the candidacy. In 2024, that wasn't the appetite that the base really had. Kamala Harris stepped in and picked up the excitement, so I'm very happy about that. One thing about Governor Walz, though, that excites me personally is that when he attributes his success as governor of Minnesota to simply saying, "I passed the Biden agenda." It wasn't anything crazy. It was just what Joe Biden wanted to do for the rest of the country. And while he has noted that he's not a very strong debater, I will say in his defense that he launched the messaging that had a very big role in changing how we talk about the Republican ticket. And generally during the job interview process, when you change the way the job is done, you're the one who gets the job. And so with his public auditioning for the vice president, for the number 2 slot on the ticket, I think he showed exactly why he's such an asset to Vice President Harris's campaign.
if I can chime in on this thing, it was a little bit earlier about messaging, and something about the messaging that I want to acknowledge. If I can take a point of personal privilege, I am, although I'm a delegate, I also am a faith leader in Portland. And what I've seen in the last week, I've started getting phone calls from people who have historically been more conservative voters with the pick of walls in the most recent messaging about targeting the evangelical movement, and actually talking with delegates here. That has been one of the deciding factors to galvanize some polling data, not polling, in the evangelical margin, what we would expect, better than we would have expected with this particular ticket. And so that was just, the messaging is working, specifically with the demographic that we're trying to target as a party.
Those are excellent points. And, Biden had on the debate stage, a lot of opportunities. And I think he did manage to land some solid punches. I always said yes, the debate was bad, but let's not exaggerate it now. Okay, Biden pointed out Trump is a convicted felon. He's the only one who's not a convicted felon on the stage. That was a powerful moment, I think, in the course of the campaign, even if Biden is not the eventual nominee of the party. I think the fact that Trump and the Republican Party feel confident on the issue of the southern border is ridiculous. Right. And I'm so glad to hear Harris actually say in her speeches that they had a bill ready to go, signed by conservative Senator James Lankford. You can't argue and say there was any kind of liberal tilts or anything to that. James Lankford of Oklahoma wrote the bill. Landlocked Oklahoma wrote the bill. Right. And what did they do? They decided to follow their master Trump, who said, don't do anything on this issue because I want to run against Biden on immigration. Now, Harris says she's going to sign the bill. My argument is, no, the time for the Republican dream bill is over. In 2025, the Democrats need to make sure they get concessions. Okay? This was a bill that was the most perfectly Republican bill that you can ever get. That is over. That ship has sailed. Okay? You had the opportunity and you blew it. Okay, you chose politics over actually doing something about this issue that you claim to care about so much. So that's gone. We need a majority. The Democrats need a majority in the Senate and the House to enact a bill that actually offers a pathway to citizenship that is more humane, that suspends all Trump era policies on the border. Right. This is what we need. No more giving in to the right for the sake of getting something done. No, they need to make sure they get some concessions on this issue. And they need to make sure that it's ingrained in the public's mind that the Republicans deliberately chose an action. This wasn't a mistake. This wasn't both sides. One side chose to keep the chaos going for political purposes. That needs to be hammered home in the course of not just this DNC week, but between now and November 5th.
Yeah, Mike, I think that has to be towards the top of a Harris administration's, first 100 days, like one of their top, policies. Like, we need to push across the immigration bill. That doesn't look like what, the Republicans decided, to not, push forward because of the idea that it would hurt Trump in the election. Like, we cannot set the precedent here that we will just bring that same bill in its same form back, right? Like, we have, like, I'm gonna say, like, teach them a lesson, but there has to be concessions from the Republican side. I think that is why it is important that not only the Harris campaign wins the White House, but that we have a Senate, we have a House that we can push forth an agenda. But I think hopefully on the debate stage, and I'm pretty sure, Vice President Harris will push this point forward to the American people, make that very clear that we had that both sides agreed on. But the only reason why that bill was stopped was because of it was not in the self-interest of Donald Trump. So they chose Trump over the country. And so you have to wrap that into the message of, being, we're going to do what's best for the country as Democrats. We're not going to put any one person, any one individual ahead of the country. And then you wrap in the fact that, we have proven that by Joe Biden stepping down, right? That he put country first. We're going to put country first. The Republican Party only puts Trump first, right? So that has to be part of messaging. But I agree with most of the points you made. One last point I'll make about the vice presidential pick. I think a lot of people thought it was going to be, I think, the governor from Pennsylvania. I think the choice of Tim Walz was maybe like shocking choice for some people, but I think it was the best choice. I think when you announce the VP pick and you immediately get the the applause from Joe Manchin and also AOC at the same time, I think you have made like a good choice, because I think if you would to pick Shapiro, I think that would have caused some issues on the left. And I also think it might have been even a signal to, I think, some of the protesters who are out there today through her pick of the vice president, her choice, that like she is, listening. And at the end of the day, I think there's been such a stark difference between the Trump administration or even Donald Trump's campaign right now on their viewpoint or their agenda that would happen in the Middle East. Well, not Middle East, what happened with that war with Israel, and where Kamala Harris has stood on that. So that response that she had at the rally a couple of weeks ago that is now infamous to some. I think it was a good point. Like, look, like I hear you. We're gonna have this discussion, but at the same time, like right now, we have to win this election, or our debates about this issue will honestly won't matter if Donald Trump is in the White House.
And going back to the debate that we saw Harris in against Mike Pence, I remember watching that debate, and she was effective, but I felt like she was responding to more his bait, like Mike Pence, because remember the stage was phrased as the prosecutor going against Mike Pence, and a lot of people were excited about potentially what was going to happen on that stage because of what they've seen in Kamala Harris on the Judiciary Committee, right? They saw her go at it with Supreme Court nominees and folks who were being grilled before the committee, and there was a lot of hype building up to that debate with that context, and I think that Mike Pence threw out a lot of red meat bait that caused her to be responsive. Now there were great responses, but the difference between Mike Pence and Trump is a bullet train. He tells 60 lies a minute, right? So you've got to be not responsive, but you've got to actually be firm and make sure that he's not driving the conversation around in a crazy manner, right? He's going to go all over the place. He's going to, they're going to talk about, healthcare, and he's going to end up talking about crowd sizes by the end of that first segment. He's going to end up talking about how she's crooked or how she's a communist or whatever the case may be. You got to stay on message and be disciplined to laser focus on what's at hand, and remind the people that he's not answering the question. Bring attention to the fact that he's not answering the question, right? Sometimes people, since I want to say in recent years, we haven't seen the moderators be as aggressive as they should. I believe that the moderators, right, from 2020 to now, even at that debate that took place in June, had an obligation to say, no, we're not just going to leave this to fact checkers at the end of the program. Trump, that was incorrect, right? Candy Crawley, 2012. Mitt Romney says that Obama did not issue a statement about Benghazi within a certain window of time. Obama said, no, that's not true. I came out in the Rose Garden within X amount of time. And Candy Crawley interrupts and she says, Governor, actually, the facts are that President Obama did come out to the Rose Garden. And Obama said, say that a little louder. And the crowd, which was present in the debate, started to laugh a little. Fox News lost their mind the next morning because they said, this is what's going on. This is not how the debate, but that's the role of the moderator. The role of the moderator is not just to throw out questions and see what you do with it. You're supposed to make sure that we're all operating in the same arena of fact, that we're not we're not on Earth 1 and Earth 2, right? So that both candidates are accountable to the questions in the same universe. And this ABC debate that's going to take place, the vice presidential debate, the moderators need to make sure that they're not just allowing the candidates to say anything that flies in their head. No, that's not true. That's inaccurate. And it's not partisan to do that, right? The fact that it's, looked at as partisan to, set the record straight on something that's irrefutable just speaks volumes of how far Trump has taken this country. And Trump has occupied too much attention in the role of politics over the past 8 years. So Harris naturally presents a turning of the page, right, into a new era of American politics. I said this before. I love history. And I looked at Obama and I compared him to Kennedy. Obama was very inspirational. Very, he had the charisma. He drew crowds. He was a larger than life figure. He's someone that historians are going to be studying for days. He's a very interesting political figure. Someone who, really, not just influenced politics, but influenced pop culture. And then you have Lyndon Johnson, the creature of the Senate, who knew how to get a lot of legislation done. He knew which buttons to push. He knew how much time to give a certain member of a committee before, hitting them back up again or following up with them again. That's Joe Biden. And then you have Nixon. Nixon is Trump. Both men view the presidency as a vehicle to attack their enemies. Both men keep a list of enemies. Both men are very thin-skinned, right? And both men ran to the right of the party. Now, Kamala Harris, I don't know where to place her. I don't know if she's Hubert Humphrey or Robert Kennedy, but this is going to be an interesting election. This is going to be an interesting election for so many reasons that we pointed out tonight. Before we conclude, I just want to give one last opportunity for anyone to jump in before the rest of the night proceeds. We've got a lot to watch, a lot of headliners: Hillary Clinton, Joe Biden, and of course the president, Joe Biden.
Well, I will say one thing about Vice President Harris as a debater. Before that primary debate where she knocked Joe Biden off ballots, the last debate he'd ever been in was the vice presidential debate against Tim Ryan, where he made Tim Ryan look like a little kid and really brought the word malarkey to the forefront of American political media. And even then, he had been regarded as a pretty strong debater until Kamala Harris knocked him off his feet in June of 2019. And she was probably the person with the most to lose by taking a swing at Biden, because he had publicly said beforehand Kamala Harris would make a very strong running mate for whoever ends up on the ticket with her. She had the long-standing friendship with Beau Biden, so by taking that swing at him, she knew she had a lot to lose, and she took the risk anyway, and that takes a lot of guts. Now, she wasn't as prepared for the next debate, but she was strong in the debates after. And in the vice presidential debate, is not to change up the race, but it's mostly to do no harm to the person at the top of the ticket. And that was her main priority. The Biden campaign team had actually told her, you don't have to worry about punching Pence in the face on the debate. You just have to keep us ahead in the polls. And that's what she went for. Now, I'm very glad to see that when a lot of these Democratic consultants with a very long history of failure, the same Democratic consultants that caused Joe Biden to start to lose his hold on the successful coalition he put together in 2020, tell Kamala Harris to ditch "We're not going back" as a slogan. When she told those consultants, thanks, but no thanks. I'm going to trust my instincts and not listen to the people who veered me on the wrong path and veered the president on the wrong path. And that's what makes me very confident in her ability to get this ticket across the finish line.
Yeah.
Since we are closing, I think it's important when we're discussing, as we're getting ready to celebrate what is happening tonight, and we're getting excited with all the talking heads discussing the futures, the pollsters, the different elected officials coming out into support. There is one thing, and the messaging that we as delegates are being encouraged to communicate is this important fact. There are states where people's names are being removed from voting rolls, and we need to get our people registered to vote. So it's great to have all of the great things about Kamala Harris, but it will come to be nothing if we do not make sure that every Democrat if anyone is eligible to vote, is ready to vote by making sure that their name, they have their IDs. If it's a state where it requires IDs, if they're on their state's voter rolls, make sure you register to vote. So if you're watching today, I'd encourage you to register to vote. Register to vote, get involved in your local party, and get ready for November. November is not tonight, but we have the opportunity to begin registering. So if you're not already registered, please go register to vote. That is the biggest piece that gets Kamala into the White House. That's the biggest piece to make sure that the Biden agenda continues on for the next 4 years and prayerfully for the next 8 years. But we cannot win if we are not at the table. There's an old saying that says this: if you are not at the table, you're on the menu. So make sure you are at the table come November by registering to vote in your local state.
Excellent point, because the state of Georgia is that state that is removing folks from the voting rolls. I just spoke to actually Mallory McMurrow. I've had an interview with her a couple of weeks ago. She's live now, but the week after that, I spoke to Lexi Daughtery, who's running for Congress for Georgia's 10th congressional district, and she was emphasizing what Reggie just expressed. There are people who are being removed from the voter rolls because of a new policy that has been enacted by the Republican-controlled legislature, right? So, go ahead, Reggie.
One of the things, and this is how easy it is. I'm in a democratically controlled state. My wife, we moved twice in the first year of our marriage. And the reality is, she didn't get a ballot. She did not receive a ballot. And Oregon is a mail-in ballot state. She did not receive a ballot. So if you've moved, especially in the rise of housing prices, you may think you're registered to vote. You may actually be registered to vote, even in the most progressive and easy to vote state. But if you are not registered to vote in your new address, it can call a lot of things into question. So even if you think you're registered to vote, make sure you're registered to vote. It's just like a smoke detector. Don't wait till the beep comes to address the problem. Every year on your birthday, the fire marshals always encourage people, every year on your birthday, make sure that the battery is changed in your smoke detector. And that way, when emergencies happen, when things come up, when big moments where the house is on fire, it works. So if you're not registered to vote, in this moment, your smoke detector is beeping. In a couple of months, there's a fire. There's smoke right now, but there will be fire. And if you're not registered to vote, even if you think you're comfortable, thinking you're already registered, this is a call to action to make sure you're registered to vote, even when you're in a safe and easy state to register to vote. Not just Georgia, but even a safe bastion like Oregon. When you move, you got to change. You got to make sure you have your updated address.
Excellent point. And look up the date in which can up until you can register. October 7th is the date for the state of Georgia. There's so many states in play that we didn't discuss. North Carolina is in play, folks. North Carolina is in play with Mark Robinson at the top of the ticket. And we didn't talk about it, but Roy Cooper removed himself from consideration to be the vice president for Kamala Harris for a specific reason. And that was that North Carolina has an archaic law from the 1800s that says if the governor is outside of the state, the lieutenant governor assumes the duties of the governor. And he knew that if he was out campaigning with Kamala Harris, this knucklehead is going to take over the governor's mansion, right? This is a man who said there should be a certain killings, that he wants to go back to the days when women couldn't vote. And nobody broke to him that during those days he couldn't vote either, right? So these are the stakes at play. The map is even more fluid, I think, than in 2020. North Carolina, Georgia, someone was saying, I heard a lot of folks telling me Florida, maybe, but there's a lot of, the stakes are high. And the potential for all kinds of states going blue is very, very real. And so it behooves you to register. It behooves you to take this election seriously. All of the
Real
memes.
quick before I also have to add, as someone who is very heavy in digital organizing spaces, what we tell people when we're asking them to vote for our preferred candidates is not just make sure you vote, it's also bring 3 friends to the polls with you. So when you're making sure you're registered to vote, make sure your household is, everyone who is voting age in your household is ready to vote. Make sure the people in your circle are registered to vote and up to date on the registration as well. I'm sorry, Mike, to interrupt, but I had to add that as well.
No, that's very important. And I just wanted to say, Gen Z does not vote at the levels that it should vote on. If Gen Z voted to the same degree as baby boomers, perhaps Bernie would be president, right? Like Gen Z and millennials need to take their civic duty very seriously. This is not a time for games. I understand, people are amused by the memes and the songs and the dances that this campaign has seemed to evoke from people, but none of that will mean a hill of beans. If there's all this hype, if there's all this celebrity endorsement, if there's all this money flowing, and the turnout is not where it needs to be on election night. We knew how heartbreaking that was on 2016, right? 2016 had a lot of celebrity endorsements, a lot of energy, around Hillary Clinton. Let's not just over exaggerate. Let's not exaggerate, the 2016 Hillary Clinton campaign. It was a very, sharp, well-run campaign for the most part. It just didn't have an effective enough message that resonated with crucial demographics. But with that being said, again, I just want to thank my panelists, Nate Honore, Kristen Copeland, Jerry Ford Jr., and Reggie. Reggie's literally where the action is. And I'm so happy to have his voice represented on the platform tonight. I'm looking forward to covering the convention throughout the rest of this week. I hope to have some of you back on if you're available. With that being said, that will conclude this episode of The Political Mic. Tune in to the Democratic National Convention. Senator LaFonza Butler of the state of California, who has replaced Kamala Harris, is currently speaking. We're going to go ahead and conclude this episode right now. Thank you and good night.
Hi, it's Mike Taylor, the host of the Political Mike podcast. If you like what you heard tonight, I want to invite you to subscribe to our YouTube channel. I also want to ask you to please follow along on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, iHeartRadio, TuneIn, and Amazon Music. You can also follow along and keep up with the conversation through our Telegram channel. Follow us on Twitter at @ThePolyMike, and follow us on Instagram. Thank you so much, and no matter what part of the political spectrum that you fall on, I want to encourage you to stay engaged, stay a part of the conversation, and stay informed. Thank you.